worried about geopolitical, economic, and trade risk, how are you managing it inside your company? This is more about tariffs. This is about all sorts of trade issues and what happens inside your organization. Geopolitics, at least according to McKinsey Global Surveys, is now the number one stated risk. And many people pay attention to it, read about it, talk about it, and then everyone puts their heads down and continues on with their work as if there's nothing they can do. In fact, only 1/3 of executives in those surveys are confident that they have the ability to manage trade policy changes. So what's important to acknowledge is that the fundamentals underneath us are changing from a rules-based order to a complex web of bilateral power dynamics disorder. So fundamentally, trade was based on rules. Everybody followed those rules and everybody could predict based on those rules. But if instead trade is based on bilateral power dynamics disorder, you have both a combination of complexity and unpredictability. And being able to manage in that is not about building systems all of a sudden, but building readiness for your organization to act. Now, why is this a fundamental shift and not a temporary pause? Because for starters, to have a rules-based system, you need the adjudication of rules. And that's actually been gone for a while now, for a couple administrations. And both parties have really adopted a mindset that the WTO was really not going to back us. So that's unlikely to return anytime soon. In fact, I would think that true adjudication through the WTO is just as unlikely to return as a whole new replacement for WTO is to come about in the near future. Now, this isn't about all trade. The amount of rules-based trade dropped rather rapidly, but over the past 10 years from 80% to 72%. Now, it doesn't sound like a big change, but it's quite a big change. It was, of course, only 80 before. But what's important is not just the number 72, but what that 28% that's not rules-based matters. That's the strategically important trade and where substitution is fundamentally the hardest. And that makes the entire system the most vulnerable. So it's still rules-based for most trade, but it's power at the strategic margins where big swings can happen. Now, fundamentally, this is a term thrown around is called geoeconomic fragmentation. This is sort of policy-driven reversal of the integration across the geopolitical lines. Some of that's about US, China. That's where it gets most of the attention because that's where a lot of the dollars are. But this is also around other trade blocs, other regions, creating different sorts of agreements. So globalism is far from dead, but a single-based, rules-based global trade system is in the process of dying. That geoeconomic fragmentation has lots of consequences. Not that long ago, Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, presented at the Munich Security Conference. Now, what's a central banker presenting at a security conference? Well, she had this to say: trade is as much a security issue as it is an economic one. And she recognizes that as this 28% becomes strategically important and power is shaping it, that trade intersects with all sorts of other factors. Expanding upon the theme of interdependence, she declared that while interdependence was once seen as a source of stability for countries, it's now a source of vulnerability, specifically to the deliberate weaponization of those dependencies. Now, we won't get into this much because this is not about geopolitics, but more about what to do about it. But this train started rolling for quite a while now, primarily on China's practices, which were persistent violations of those rules, and where it was done mostly for their own advantage, where also in the short term, most other countries benefited as well, mostly in cheaper goods. And so that's why it was allowed to go on as long as it did. But that was somewhat deceptive, whether intentionally or not, and we can argue that case, because the long-term harm was very real. Then, or more recently, President Trump's administration used the shifting tides of throwing out the rules to take actions against many other countries. And rather than encircle China with other trade allies and trying to isolate them, it really turned towards bilateral trade power dynamics, which push back on almost all trade partners, rapidly accelerating the overall shift where everybody's making different kinds of decisions in a different type of environment. Now, this is not, again, just about tariffs. So keeping track of tariffs is not where you get all of your leverage. It's simply the most acute right now because it affects every consumer's wallet at a fairly significant level. But it's also about economic sanctions, which is a long-used tool, which may increase in terms of how many countries use them. Import and export restrictions, especially getting a lot of attention around rare earths, where that's a big concern for a lot of industries. And licenses, which either are a chance to extract fees or simply limit what goes in and out, along with industrial policy, where certainly we see the US government taking more direct stakes in companies and helping shape what they can and can't do, which is a big shift in how we look at affecting the industrial economy. Now, again, if you're inside a company, what are you going to do about this? I'm going to focus more on supply chain because that's where the risks are most acute. But this affects other things from currency exchanges to your own staffing and where you put offices. So almost every global decision and every country-to-country decision depends on some of these factors. So I'm going to share 6 basic strategies. None of them are profound, but you start putting them together deliberately and you're more ready to respond to an environment that is changing under your economic feet. So number 1, forget predicting. Manage your risk appetite, not probabilities. So focus on sensing, on understanding and being ready and having the information of what's really going on. Selecting strategies that either de-risk, which is removing risk or minimizing risk, or build robustness, where you're essentially immune to certain changes because of how you've architected your product, your supply chain, et cetera. And along with that, being organized for agility, the ability to act faster than your peers, for example, or simply acting faster than the changes allows you to minimize the impact as you're sensing changes underneath. So move from predicting to sensing, strategies, and agility. Number 2, think about your org structure. Who owns the data? Not just tariffs, but who owns all of those set of facts, keeping it up to date, owning that sensing. There should be one set of facts inside an organization. And essentially, we're taking mapping, a map from a noun to a verb. We want to continually be mapping a continuously updated map along with the pre-built options of what to do as that map changes. Who owns that? Somebody has to own it. We can't have every person reading the Wall Street Journal over the weekend and coming on a Monday with a different set of opinions. Number 3, build your models not based on SKUs, not based on spend, but your impact on revenue. So where does a small dollar risk on the spend side turn into a big revenue risk because you can't ship? This is especially where licenses and trade restrictions start to impact things. So a recent example is helium. Helium prices have gone up greatly because a lot of it comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. But it's not a huge impact in dollars on the manufacturing of semiconductors. However, if that helium supply turned to near zero, not being able to ship semiconductors could be a global economy killer. So this isn't about the amount you're spending on helium, but it's risk as it affects your fundamental supply chain. So build your models based on revenue risk, not just spend risk. Fourth, check your metrics and your incentives. For a long time, supply chain teams were based on fundamentally focused on cost reduction, inventory reduction, and not measured risk reduction. If no one wakes up on a Tuesday thinking about measured risk reduction, you'll never get that focus. So whether it's the supply chain team or somebody in the CFO's office, somebody has to be aligned around that metric, because not all the strategies, but many of the strategies around measured risk reduction will cost you more. And therefore, the incentives can be to ignore that risk. Fifth, consider design, the design of your products. So you can either change your design or simply build designs that are more robust against those changes and put them on a shelf for when you need them. So build product features that de-risk where you could be cut off. Again, pay attention to that 28% of trade that is not rules-based. Where does that affect your potential to ship, and what are the design alternatives? Be ready for that. Tesla announced a rare earth-free next-gen drive motor, and while I don't know where they are on that, there's a lot of negative consequences to that. It's likely to cost more, weigh more, be less powerful, but that's certainly a better trade-off to have that design ready than being cut off and having no revenue. So consider your design options. Where are you locked into high-risk supply? And sixth, participate in peer groups or forums where you can keep current with what other companies are seeing, what other companies are doing. This is one of those areas where it's probably not just about having really proprietary strategies, but where strength in numbers actually can improve the whole system. So one such example is the Center for Supply Chain Research at Lehigh, which also sponsors a quarterly risk survey for supply chain risk. So look for what other companies are doing. And at some levels, there's opportunities to collaborate to reduce risk, to protect the overall economic ecosystem. So geopolitical risk is rising. Geopolitical risk affected on trade is increasing. And simply being aware of that and doing nothing is not exactly the most opportune moments. Most people complain about black swans, things that were unpredictable. But many black swans are actually gray swans, unlikely things that are predictable, but we simply ignored the risk. And so we feel better calling it a black swan. Economic trade barriers are a gray swan. They may not affect your company dramatically today. The risk is real, and not being prepared is not okay. So good luck. It's a challenging environment. This is why organizations must be ready.